voice of Jesus saying, hey, come and walk with me on the water. Don't hesitate, he still saying, hey, come and walk with me on the water. To the left and right, distractions arise. Just steer my focus away. Amid the storm, direction's torn. Come on, walk with me on the water. Come on, walk with me on the water.
Hi, my name is Andrew McNeese, and this is TMI, Too Much Information, where the goal is to fill your mind with biblical knowledge to the point it explodes, one bite at a time. Now, before we get started, it's important that you know I'm not a biblical scholar. I flunked out of Bible school. I barely made it out of high school. I have a degree in nothing. I'm an expert at nothing. If you were to put all of the Christians of the world, the greatest on my left, the least on my right, I would be at the end of this side of the room. Now that said, I do believe that truth is truth, regardless of the source, or in my case, in spite of the source. What I would encourage you to do is to weigh what you hear. And if what you hear has the ring of truth that you've come to recognize as from God, by all means, apply it to your life. If on the other hand you hear something out of my mouth and it makes you think to yourself, oh my gosh, this guy is on crack, well in that case, spit it out. Don't apply it, disregard it, and warn all of your friends to stay away from that guy on TMI. Now, with that out of the way, let's move on to today's lesson. Today we're going to take a look at Revelation chapter 3, verses 18 and 19. Before we go there though, let's do a recap of what we studied in verses 14 through 18. There God talked about how the Laodicean church was neither hot nor cold. They had moved into this lukewarm condition, and it was something that was almost nauseous to him, made him want to vomit them out of his mouth. To take that whole idea of eating and food analogy a little bit further, why don't you imagine two dishes, one of them ice cream, praline and cream, a little extra caramel mixed around in the mix there, and it's so good. It's icy cold, and yet it melts in your mouth, and it's just good. But if you take that pralines and cream and you elevate it to room temperature, what happens? It melts into this goo, and when you take a bite, it's just not the same. Take another dish. How about biscuits and gravy? Oh yeah, they are so good. Piping hot, the steam rising off of your plate. The textures, the flavors, it's just perfect for breakfast. But if you let it set and cool down to room temperature, take a bite, what happens? You want to vomit it out of your mouth. Well, this is kind of what God was talking about when he was showing the difference between hot and cold, and yet both of them being important. You see, he wasn't talking about a progression of development where you start cold and then you move on to lukewarm and then you become hot. What he was actually saying is that hot and cold, though polar opposites, are very important elements of our lives. He's called us to those kinds of extremes, that kind of abundance. It's when we don't live in the extremes and coalesce in that lukewarm state that our life loses its vision and it loses its purpose. It loses its excitement and its spice. And that's the condition that God is calling us to avoid. And that brings us now to verses 18 and 19. The bottom of verse 17 says, "You brag, I'm rich, I've got it made. I need nothing from anyone," oblivious that in fact you're a pitiful blind beggar, threadbare and homeless. You see, when we abandon the extremes that God has called us to live in and we become lukewarm, then a blindness settles in and we lose vision for what God has actually called us for. Fortunately though, there is a cure, and God starts to share it in verse 18. This is what he says. "Here's what I want you to do. Buy your gold from me, gold that's been through the refiner's fire. Then you'll be rich. Buy your clothes from me, clothes designed in heaven. You've gone around half naked long enough. And buy medicine for your eyes from me so you can see, really see. The people I love I call to account, prod and correct and guide, so they'll live at their best. Up on your feet then, about face, run after God. In this segment, God is saying, buy gold from me. So what does he mean by that? Well, gold is something we value, and I think what he's saying there is to value what he values. So what does God value? Well, he values relationship. He values love. He values righteousness. I think the challenge here that he's setting before us is allow him to define what is valuable for us. He also says, buy clothes from me. So what does that mean? Well, in the Bible, usually clothing refers to the things that we do. So what he's saying here is, don't only just value what's important to me, but put those things into practice. God is saying, allow me to develop in ever-increasing measure the practice of the things that I value. In other words, he's saying, put on my righteousness. Finally, he says, buy medicine from me so that you can see, really see. So what does he mean there? Well, I think what he's saying is that he wants to do a supernatural healing in our hearts and our lives. I believe God is all about partnerships. And I believe that in our walk with him, there will always be things that we can do. For example, we can educate ourselves into the things that please him. And we can begin that process of walking some of those things out. But when it comes to what we really understand and know and how we see God, sometimes that requires something only God can do, the miraculous. And when he says, buy medicine from me so that you can truly see, what he's saying there, I think, is he's saying, allow me to do a supernatural healing in you so that you will know down in your heart that I am good and I am faithful and I am just and I have good things in store for you. It won't be just something that you parrot and say. There's an old meal prayer. It says, God is great and God is good. Let us thank him for our food. And he's saying, I'm not interested in something that's memorized and parroted. He wants to develop something where we know without question God is great. God is good. God really does love us. But we can't conjure that up ourselves. He has to do that. He has to do a healing. And that's what he's talking about. He says, allow me to do this healing. Buy this medicine from me. Christians get themselves in trouble when they get the possible and the impossible mixed up. And this is what happens. Either we just don't bother with the possible and we miss out on the impossible, or we get so caught up in the possible that we latch hold of the impossible part that only God can do and become religious. God's saying, be in balance. You do your part, but don't forget to allow him to do his miraculous part. So, as we buy gold from him, begin valuing what he values, as we begin to put on clothing that we obtain from him, in other words, as we begin walking out the life that he's called us to, as we step aside and allow him to do a miraculous work of repairing our vision and understanding of his very nature towards us, then this is what happens. The blindness begins to go away. Vision begins to form in our lives, and we begin to be enabled to live in those extremes of heat and coldness, which is the life that he's designed us for. So in conclusion, I would encourage you to value what God values, to walk out what God values, and to step aside and allow him to do a miraculous changing of your understanding of his nature towards you. As you do that, vision is going to be restored. And you will find that you'll be able to live out the extremes of life that God has designed you for. And you will experience a whole new abundance. That's our lesson for today. I'm Andrew McNeese, and this is TMI.